Honey Sound Broadcasting, an affiliate of the Bilko Media Network.
So let's go ahead and start. How about you start us off, Bill?
Okay, I'll start, but I think you need to lead because I saw this over a year ago, or about a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Because I saw it in January, and I don't have Amazon Prime anymore, so I couldn't
Oh,
exactly
okay.
go back and watch it. And
Well,
since you're fresh off the presses,
Mhm.
I need you to kind of lead this one.
All right, no problem.
But yeah, we're started here debating Man in the High Castle, Nazis in America. What more could you ask for?
The Illinois Nazis. We learned that they're the worst.
When I first heard about that Amazon was doing this, let's, I guess, do a little history here.
Yeah.
I wanted to like this. I really, really wanted to like it. Because actually, they stole my idea because back when I was in like grade school or early high school, I got to thinking, you know what? What if the Nazis won World War II? What would today be like? I bet that would make a really good movie. And lo and behold, here's Amazon doing this. And then after I watched the series, I realized, wait a minute, this is based on the book written in like 1962.
Yes.
Which after I watched the series, I have the audiobook, but I have yet to go back and listen to it. But it's on the to-do list, so I'm really excited to see what it was like. Because, obviously 1962 is a whole different world than today. And I'm wondering how this book was written then, fresh off, the heels of World War II.
Right.
Versus, like today, and the way Amazon adopted it to be in today's world and context. So I'm kind of excited to go back and read the book and see how it relates to the series. But, I mean, from a high-level perspective, and I'll just give you this and then pass it over to you, what I got in the beginning was a lot of Nazism. I got the German engineering. You think of like the Nazi like supersonic jet plane, which is awesome. Yep. You got giant buildings with huge Nazi banners on them. I love that aspect of it, of seeing like the Empire State Building with a giant Nazi thing on it. But then as the series went on, and there's only 10 episodes in the first season, I guess. As that went on, it changed from a story about Nazis to some stupid talky love story, and the whole like Nazi thing to me kind of was like a back burner, and it just almost fell off at the end. So what are your thoughts from a high level?
I'll describe how I found out about this or heard about this. I've always been interested in like the alternate universe genre.
Yes, me too.
And I'll just say, just as a baseline critique, I mean, by the fact that it's the, I think, only really very well produced, very obviously alternate universe science fiction on TV right now. So give it credit for that, because this is a genre that, as far as I know, like doesn't really exist on TV. So I think there are lots of things that come with that genre that are really interesting. For example, in the show, you get treated to see what it's like to be the white underclass in America, where whites are the underclass, and ethnic Americans are the underclass, which is something you need to go to an alternate universe to see that. You need, and that's an interesting, kind of take on what does it mean to be like not the dominant culture, in your own homeland, as it were. I've always been very interested in the alternate universe stuff, what it is to live in that, or how things could have gone differently.
Because I mean, let's face it, the Germans could have very easily have won World War II.
Yes.
If things would have continued on their way.
But I would say that like I got into this because I'm into the alternate universe genre. It's obviously it's one of the more famous alternate universe history books or whatever. I'd never read it, but I knew like the general kind of the plot. I like alternate history maps, right? So when it came to who owns what when the Japanese and the Germans take over, and it was really fascinating. And I think that as far as alternate universes go, because what you have to do in order to create an alternate universe is you have to say, okay, well, this is like our reality, and this is the point of divergence. All right, so Napoleon loses a nail in a horse's shoe as he's charging up some hill, and he dies really young. France never gets a Napoleon. What happens?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fascinating question to ask. If science is engaged, science fiction should be engaged in the question. What if we had warp drive? What if we had unobtainium and could go drill to the Earth's core, right? Like what if, and that
what if
kind of
time travel was possible? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So when you have what ifs of history, that's also very interesting. So you kind of think, well, everything is basically the same except this one thing. What happens? Right. Obviously, you only get one history, you only get one Earth. So it's all. It's a bit of a intellectual fantasy of the highest order, right? Because you're never going to be able to present the counterfactual,
unless you do invent time travel and go back and change something and then live it out.
Right, exactly. But Hawking says we can't. So as far as I'm concerned, I listen to him. We can't test this stuff out. So it really goes to, well, how realistic are your assumptions? Are you assuming like an alternate universe where North Korea takes over the world? Takes a lot of assumptions, that may or may not really be justified. Okay, So I think the Man in the High Castle universe presents a very strong alternate universe. I've looked it up. I think that this is basically the history of the Man in the High Castle. The point of divergence from our timeline is FDR is assassinated. Okay, so there's no New Deal, which means that America grinds on underneath the Depression for years and years and years while war breaks out in Europe, because they stay out of the war and are neutral. They never build up an arms industry that gets them out of the Great Depression. They never sell anything to like Great Britain or the Soviets. So Great Britain and the Soviets, well, Great Britain comes to I guess some agreement with the Axis powers, and loses Australia to the Japanese. But it's not altogether really clear to me like how the British would have lost, because the British Empire at this point still man,
span the globe.
They were if you were going to poke anybody in the eye, and it would probably be the worst idea, it was still at this point the British Empire, not America. So, it's hard for me really to believe that, the British didn't, say, go to Canada and, fight in exile there, so...
Well, I mean, ultimately what made the Nazis win the war is they developed their own nuclear weapons, obviously, before America did, and used them.
Right, but if we're talking about early World War II...
Right, in the earlier side, I mean, they are kind of sketchy on the details, so who knows how it all kind of...
Yeah. Yeah, but it's at some point, Britain is either, forced to stay neutral or knocked out of the war, and the Germans are able to, basically bulldoze through the Soviets, no problem. And there's a mega Holocaust that happens to all the Slavs, and they just, depopulate all of Western Russia and settle German colonies there. And so and then also in terms of craziness, they're doing these geoengineering projects where they block off the Axis powers block off the Mediterranean and turn it into farmland. They just drain the Mediterranean Sea. And Italy owns this giant bowl where the Mediterranean Sea used to be, and it's the most fertile farmland on earth, and it's run by Italy. So there's that, and then of course, the minute they got their hands on Africa, right, it was let's enslave and work all these people to death. And meanwhile, while they're doing all this, the Nazis are doing they're starting up at the time, I believe in the books, at the time in 1962, they are just beginning to explore Mars, and they have a functioning moon colony. Yes, the Nazis have.
I do think in the series that I kind of remember something about they mentioned the moon colony at somewhere along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are Nazis on the moon.
Nazis on the move, it sounds like.
Nazis on the move.
Let's can we talk about the map real fast, or at least of the United States? Because one thing I did not understand is why they stopped. I mean, you got the Japanese on the west coast, the Nazis on the east coast. Why is there this giant neutral zone in the middle? I mean, why couldn't Hitler finish the job?
The neutral zone, as far as I understand, like a National Geographic barrier, and
right.
there is one in South America too. I think the Japanese own modern day Chile and the western half of South America, and the Nazis own the eastern half, and Argentina and Brazil and everything east of I think the Andes Mountains, right? But, I mean, it goes down to the fact that there are mountains in the way, and when you're looking to create a divide, natural barriers are always a thing that divides you. So, it would make sense, I feel, to have a buffer zone in between these two super powerful mega states, right? And really, I mean, they're both colonies. It's not this isn't the Japanese don't really think of the Pacific states as equivalent to the home islands of Japan, mm-hmm. right? They're the same thing about the Germans. They don't view the eastern seaboard of America as the same of Germany, all right? These are kind of semi-independent tributaries,
right?
So they're probably
kind of
not
us in Guam kind of thing.
Yeah, they're not willing to mess around with a giant war just to expand into West Kansas. Who cares, right? So so I mean, there's probably stuff maybe a timber industry stuff in the mountains of Colorado or whatever, but one thing you have to remember though is that America it doesn't look like the America in 1962. There are no interstate highways. The interstate highway bill passed in the 1950s. So America is mostly dominated by small rural roads that don't really go anywhere, and you really have to do huge infrastructure improvements to get things working in the western United States, period. You have to get rail in there. You have to get, highways in there, and stuff like that. And honestly, I mean, they're only 20 years after the end of the war, so I wouldn't expect them to be, really even focusing on, trying to get the mountains. I think they'd be mostly trying to, control what they have.
Uh-huh. I just thought it was odd that they have this gentleman's agreement neutral zone between the two superpowers, where obviously the rebels kind of congregate.
Well, there's something like that in Siberia and Mongolia too, where it's like the what Russia used to be. That's where they're all. I mean, the government of Russia or whatever that looks like in this universe. It's probably just a giant slave camp or something, or just deal. But there's something like that in Asia. On the steppe, there's a demilitarized zone between the Manchuria and where the Japanese own stuff. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the map, and I think that it makes sense. It makes sense if you were able to. I don't like the map too much, or the point of divergence too much, because it's okay, well then you have to assume that the whole war was won due to Franklin Roosevelt being alive or not, which just doesn't, it just seems like too much power to assign to one individual, but it's a plausible sequence of events, and and that's really where you have to. You can only really ride the alternate history train so far, and you really have to only get off it. The last stop is okay, well, that's plausible. I could buy that, because you're never going to be able to test this stuff out or prove it, right? So,
by the way, did you hear about like the advertising controversy with like the subways?
I did.
Subway advertising.
They just put fucking swastikas up on the subway.
Yeah, like, they put like the American flag with the Nazi symbols all over the subway and the Japanese flag all over the subway with very subtle references to the Man in the High Castle. So if you didn't know what was going on, you would walk in there and be like, "What is this?"
Yeah, and you do this in New York, right?
Yeah, of all places,
with the place that has I think more Jews than Israel. Like there is a school of thought that bad press is good press, and clearly, if this was intentional, which it had to be, unless these people were just morons, in the marketing department, but it had to be intentional, and it had to be designed to like stir up controversy and
because like I said, if you look at the seats, like there's nothing on the seats that say this is an advertising for the show. The poster's like, well, the normal poster is up in the corner, but there's no real clear reference between like the seats that are all decked out in these American Nazi symbols versus the show. Like there's no tie-in. And like I said, if you didn't know Man in the High Castle was coming out and you just walk into the subway, you'd be like, what is this?
Yeah, that's I mean, what are you gonna say? Like it's obviously someone who's trying to provoke a reaction.
Right.
And
I mean, like I said, bad press is still good press because it gets you.
Bad press is still good press, but you need to approach this with some sort of reverence, because like these were real ideologies that really we're still dealing with the echoes of what happened here. Part of it is the fact that it's so recent. Obviously, if you were to do something that was like an alternate history of like the Mongols or something, well then that we're farther enough removed from that. We don't really sense that historically. But with a subject that is still resonant today, like Nazism.
You have people are still alive that lived through that.
Yeah, so like, you should be able to do whatever the hell you want to do, right? There's always that caveat,
This is America.
Right, and if the American Nazi Party, okay, for real, wanted to put like Nazi flags on the subway, all right, well, guess what? They can do that, and I think it's super distasteful, and I think they should get some judgment from it, but they should be able to do it just in the same way that I should be able to take one of their stupid flags and burn it in the street. That's the other flip side of it, right? The thing is that it was a calculated move to generate advertising by controversy online, because they had to know that they were going to have to pull the ads at some point. They would face some sort of public pressure, and then either they or Amazon would pull the ads or whatever, and it would be this big thing. And so they were hoping it. But that's the problem I really have with it. Is that it wasn't done to advertise the show. It was done to create controversy, which would then advertise the show. Yeah, and I'm like, man, already if you're trying to promote this by stirring up hornets' nests, you're off on the wrong track. Subway, literally, yeah. I had heard about this, to get back to what we were saying earlier. I'd heard about this, through the grapevine. And then I saw the pilot, and I watched the pilot probably 3 or 4 times. I thought it was amazing. I thought the pacing was great.
What you got in the beginning was lots of Nazis and it was very it was very focused on this alternate universe. It was very focused on,
Yeah.
what would life be like under Nazi rule and Japanese rule.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought that, they were going to kind of use, like, what I totally missed was the map, and that was present. There were lots of like maps of red lines, going across in the first pilot episode. And I thought that was really great because it was like, okay, all right, this is cool. Like, we should get to experience, like, obviously, you're not going to have like a Nazi Anthony Bourdain like cruising around like the best seafood shops on the Nazi. Like, you need to have some compelling reason to explore this world you created, okay? And finding like a magical tape or whatever, is certainly that you have to drop off and all the spy stuff. Yeah, that's a compelling reason to explore this world. My only problem is that stopped. And they basically, everybody kind of went back to where they were, and you didn't really get to see much more of this world, than you'd already seen. But when I saw the first pilot, I watched it like 3 or 4 times, because it was really great. I didn't like that the guy turned out to be a Nazi at the end. That seemed a little silly, but it introduced me to this cast of characters that I really liked. Initially, I think that the lead actors, I initially liked them more and liked them less and less as the series went on. But the supporting actors, especially Obergruppenführer Smith.
I loved him.
Yes,
I love the Japanese guy.
The Japanese guy. Both Japanese guys, the inspector and the trade minister.
Yes.
I loved them, and I love that the plot is based on like, okay, so if Hitler dies, both these. So like it is a very effective novel. It's a very interesting novel where you're rooting for Hitler to live.
Right. Because when Hitler dies, war is going to break out.
War is going to break out. So like that's a fascinating place to put yourself in, where you're just like, oh my God, things are so bad that I'm rooting for Hitler. So. It's that that's a fascinating and compelling kind of hook to things right there. I just think that as the series went on, I grew less and less sympathetic towards the main characters, and I think that coupled with the tape, which we'll get into later, I think that those are the weakest points of the show, and the problem is that they're weak and they're central. They are weak and they were to the side. It wouldn't really matter. Like, I feel like they got the casting, almost like reverse. Like the secondary and tertiary characters, I like them so much more than the main characters.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. From what I recall, because like I said, like they kind of turned it into just a love story, and it could that story between those two people in the neutral zone. It could have happened in any situation. Like, you remove the Nazis and the Japanese from this situation, and that's you could still have the same story and apply it to anything. And so that's what I didn't like about it, because they just ignored the whole fact that everybody was taken over by Nazis towards the end.
And if anything, so it alternates between like reminding us that we live in this horrible Nazi, like hell on earth world, okay? And when it does remind us of that, there are effective moments where it's like it just casually gets mentioned that, oh, what's all this ash coming down? Oh, it's just Tuesday. They're burning all the cripples at the hospital. And when that stuff gets casually stated, it's great. And there are little moments in there where the guy is, flipping those 2 lighters, is like, one of these was the lighter that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was assassinated with. And those moments where, you get these little, because, you don't want to have like a film, like a Star Wars film reel crawl where it's just like, and then Franklin Delano Roosevelt was assassinated, and then Stalin was executed in this date, you know, and like you want to keep the audience guessing and tell them the important
Right,
stuff.
and it's
but
way
also,
better to do it like subtly like that than to just flat out embellish on it, you know.
Yes. So that I think was well done. But a lot of the things that were in this thing were kind of either like generic romance love story stuff or generic spy stuff. Like that whole scene, you know, the German guy is trying to slip off the microfilm to the Japanese guy, you know, his contact. First of all, it took me like 3 or 4 times to even understand like what the hell was going on in that scene. Because, you know, I was like, well, you're setting it up to make it look like you want the prince assassinated. Like, it was very confusing, like, what they were trying to set up there. And then finally I'm like, oh, okay, well, the German guy wants to deliver the microfilm canister. So I think that could have been done. But you know, like, that's standard spy story stuff, you know, delivering the secret thing at the
that's
cocktail
what I said, like,
party.
you boil down the main storyline, there's nothing there that specializes this.
Yeah.
You know, in any way.
Yeah, and I think a lot was lost when they hit that reset button and they both moved. Like, that girl, like, was on the run, like, and then she just kind of came back, and everything was fine.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
that.
because, you know, the other guy had, you know, obviously he was on like a secret Nazi mission or something, but when I saw the pilot, like, I was very much under the opinion that she had done this and there was no going back, right? And she went back, and, like, she just shows up at her old dojo like nothing happens, and they're like, the police fucking want you. What are you doing? You know, like, what?
Yeah.
And she goes into the police, and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I think that's a great point to talk about the main characters. So Frank, Juliana, and Joe. So Frank is the guy who looks like Ben Folds with the glasses in San Francisco. Juliana is the girl, and Joe is the Nazi.
Yeah.
So what do you think about all of them?
Like I said, I think the main characters were kind of generic, and their storylines just kind of blurred, and
Yep.
what I recall, like, there wasn't really anything special about them too much. Although I did kind of like Joe off and on along the way, if I recall it correctly. Like, he had his moments, but then he also had his moments where you're like, come on, what are you doing? So
what do you think about? Okay, so you watched this a while ago, but let me refresh you. So at the very end, like, Juliana is like the Gilligan of the Resistance, okay? If they just killed her and ate her, like, nobody would die ever, and the Resistance would go off without a hitch. She screws them over so many times. It's unreal that those two Resistance people, who seem to know what they're doing, like they keep trusting her.
Yeah.
And they keep assigning things to her. And I'm like, she's burned you before. It's very clear that she's burned you before, and she's going to burn you again. Like, when she talked to the Resistance member for the first time and said, oh, yeah, I met this guy in Canyon City, and he's from the East Coast Resistance, and he has all this stuff. Like, you know, the San Francisco Resistance woman, she should have been like, okay, so you met this Resistance member. Who was he? What did he look like? What happened? What'd you tell him? Like, i.e., is my cover blown?
Right.
And then what I would do is immediately when she left, I would, you know, get on the phone or somehow contact. Who is this guy? All right. Did you send someone? Was anybody sent? If not,
do your homework.
You do your homework, right? So, like, you know. And she says that they have ways to contact the Resistance in the East, and it's like, okay, so, you know, you guys need to figure out if this guy was legit or not, and you know, it doesn't sound legit, so like they should have been much more suspicious of her then, but somehow, like, they get her a job in the government, which is like, doubly stupid because Frank is like under suspicion of trying to kill the prime, or not the prime minister,
or prince
the
guy,
prince, right? The prince. Yeah. So Frank is under suspicion of that. So she's not only is she endangering Frank further after getting his niece, nephew, and sister killed. Like,
yeah,
she just ran off and didn't really give a shit, and like, okay, I guess obviously no, you're not responsible for them dying. The Japanese are responsible. On the other hand, you live in this world, and you should have maybe like internalized the consequences of pissing off this
right, like
totalitarian state.
Right, you would have known better.
Yeah, like I feel like she either should have known better or whatever, but like, so Juliana like keeps on screwing up, and she burns Frank by not being there because she went off to rescue these resistance members, despite being like, it's day 3 at the resistance for you, okay?
Right, I mean, she didn't even know which her, like, what was it, her sister or cousin or whoever got killed. She didn't really even know what was going on, and yet she just picked things up like she never, died or
yeah.
And like you said, this is like day 3 for her, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna just waltz on over to the neutral zone and to try to deliver this thing of film or whatever she was doing.
Well, I was talking about when she goes back in and she tries to rescue Joe.
Back? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like she leaves Frank high and dry for the bus after Frank is like pretty sure that they have like a 48-hour window to not die. All right, and he's told her that.
Yeah.
Like he's said to her, look, if we don't get out of here now, we're probably not getting out of here. I'm probably going to die, for sure. And then she's just I mean. Like, I'm gonna go rescue this guy who you think I've been having sex with, and then maybe I'll stop by like Dunkin' Donuts later, I mean, she's totally and she's totally
so disconnected from reality. It seems
she's so disconnected from reality. Either she thinks like she's so valuable to the resistance or something that it's going to be her that saves everyone, despite the fact that these are people who have been doing it for years and years more than she has. Like, And then so she screws the pooch and leaves Frank to sit on the bus. And this is my problem with Frank, is that he just rolls over and takes it. Like, like, Frank, buddy, I know she's really cute. Man, like, no, I get it, okay? She's really cute, okay? But you need, Frank, please stop thinking of your dick. Please, you're gonna die. Frank, if you don't stop, Frank, you're gonna die. The Japanese are gonna kill you. You need to have a sense of priorities here. She has shown to you that she doesn't give a fuck about you. Like, and if that's the biggest thing, is like, it's both their faults. I mean, Juliana for being so shitty and narcissistic and not giving a fuck about, the person who she's living with the guy, all right? It's right. A pretty serious thing. Come on, don't do that. Don't, and obviously, but the thing is that at a certain point, I'm like, okay, Frank, I don't know how to help you, man. Like, you just keep on taking it on the chin time after time, and you're never walking away. So, like, I mean,
it really is both of their faults, and they're both idiots, and I think that's why we hate them so much, is because
right.
Like they're both so stupid. How have they not been killed already by this point?
Right. And I think that if they weren't in a relationship, I think I would like them a little more as characters, but they're both so shitty to each other, and they both never really address it or realize it, that I just can't get over it, and her weird relationship with Joe is the, it's this weird, like, okay, so why did you throw in this Twilight romance, into Like I guess at some point, the Amazon execs were like, we need a female lead with 2 male love interests because that's what's really hot right
That's
now.
what sells.
That's what sells. Got to get the 18 to 20, whatever, the demo or something. And I'm like,
The Dutch female market.
okay, the Dutch female market. But it does it further the story? No, it doesn't.
No, not at all.
And does it result in compelling situations? Not really. It really does come to a head when at the end Juliana is. I was so excited for her because I was so stoked that Joe is going to get shot and die because remember that one of the things that she did. So this is what she did. So the Resistance tells her that they're going to put her if she just delivers Joe into this trap, they're going to put her and Frank on a boat to Mexico. All right, so they'll be safe.
Mm-hmm.
If they just and if they don't and they let this Joe go, and because he's a Nazi agent, they know he's a Nazi agent, he's going to give all their names, all their information. It's obvious. It's a clear thing. All right. You can't let this, at a minimum, you can't let him go. You can't let him go back to the high command, because if he does, then they're all screwed. Okay. Right. So Juliana gets him in an alleyway or something. And I was so excited because I was like, oh my God. So I'm going to have a win-win situation here. They're going to kill off Joe, who I'm not too thrilled. I'm not too stoked about him anyway as a character. Okay. And also you're going to really improve Juliana because it's like, oh, she has like a dark, cold side to her where she's able completely just to smile and chit-chat, to someone and walk them down an alley and then turn around and be like...
get assassinated.
Yeah, right? And so I was like really pumped for that. But he says like the stupidest, most cliche thing I can imagine, which is like you changed me or something. And she's just like, oh my God, you're right. You're so right. I'm letting you go. And he lets him go of like the tape, and they lets him go of like all the information. And by doing that, she fucks over Frank for like a second time in like 24 hours, like after stealing his money. There's no end. There's no end to how shitty she is, and how awful. At that point, like the resistance lost credit with me, because at that point, like you don't get to live after that.
Right? They still welcomed her back in, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and I'm like, no. And so. My biggest problem is it's so there are two storylines that I think that are the main storylines of The Man in the High Castle. Okay, the first storyline is revolving around the American resistance, the tapes, and getting the tapes to The Man in the High Castle. Okay, yep. The second story is the wider geopolitical story of Hitler is about to die. When he does, the Reich is going to go to war for the Pacific states. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the only story that gets advanced anywhere. All right. And so who is it? Takomi and, the Japanese inspector and, maybe to a lesser extent, Open Group and Führer, those are the only people that are involved in a plot that, has because the tapes, just as much about the tapes and The Man in the High Castle from minute 0, the first episode, to the end.
For being called Man in the High Castle, you sure don't know anything about.
You sure don't know anything about this guy, and we'll get into that later. But the other story, I don't think it's surprising that we like the characters that are involved in that story better, because that story is the stronger of the two stories.
It has an arc. It's more interesting than this, like I said, generic, boring, standard love story kind of that happens with the quote unquote main people. Because it felt like a lot of those middle episodes, middle to middle end was just filler. It was all filler with this just back and forth nonsense that did not advance, like I said, the main story, which I think is like the whole resistance movement that it should be about.
Well, I think you could have cut out that entire like Marshall character from the Old West. Like you could have cut out like that entire episode, and the probably the episode after that, like because nothing really changes.
Yeah, nothing advances the story, and it was just filler.
And honestly, like it's kind of weird. Like I feel like they maybe just backed themselves into a corner a little bit, you know, because the pilot was so well paced and high energy. Like, if the pilot had been like one of the last episodes, like I think that would have made the entire series a little bit more satisfying. Because if we maybe got to have like a slow, here's a day in the life of the guy living in the Reich. Here's the day in the life of, and then. 3 or whatever episodes in, you find this tape, MacGuffin that starts off the. I think that works. Instead, it was they find these magical, wonderful tapes or whatever, and then they're catapulted into this, the world, but then they just kind of go back and they're doing laundry on Tuesdays again, and it's not like the structure didn't really seem well thought out. For at least the main characters. I'm ready to get into the tape subject when you are.
Let's talk into the tapes, because this is something I haven't really discussed with anybody, but I'd like to get your inputs on what the heck these are all about.
I'm a fucking internet expert on these tapes now. All right, because I've researched everything because I don't.
Let me back up a little bit. Are the tapes in the book? Do you know that?
So okay, in the book. The titular there's a book that is called The Man in the High Castle.
Right.
Okay.
Came out in
1962. It's a novel and a novel. Okay. That book, and I haven't read The Man in the High Castle, the book, so obviously I may be wrong here. Okay. But that book, as far as I understand, is a work of fiction that does not describe our world. It is like an anti-fascist book, propaganda book written by I don't know who it is, but like I think it's called the book in the book is called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy.
And the movie.
Yes, and in that the British in that book, the British and the Americans win the war, and then they are the two superpowers that face off against each other. So, like the book in the book is not describing our timeline. It is a wholly fictional thing written in that timeline. And the interesting thing I heard about that was the reason why it's the British and the Americans facing off in this book is because everybody's bought into the Nazi ideology at this point. Mm-hmm. So, like the Russians are like racially impure. So, of course, the Russians and the Americans would never go at it because the Russians are just so racially impure that they would never, ever get to great power status. So it's got to be the American and the British that go after each other, So it's still a retelling of the timeline that they're in,
right.
But it's not our universe.
It's not the quote-unquote way it should be, like we know it with the movie. Okay.
Yes. However, in this, it's pretty clear, aside from one tape, it's pretty clear that these are like as if a portal had been opened into our universe, right?
Right.
Because one of the things that frustrates me about these tapes is that to us watching as viewers, like they're
well, we know that there's some kind of interdimensional
there's
sci-fi thing going on here.
Yes,
but it's just so far removed from the actual context of what's going on in the show.
Yes,
like it just clashes, and it doesn't unless they have a pretty darn good explanation for what's going on here.
Right,
it doesn't work.
Which never comes, and it makes me doubt the writers. the writers know what they're doing.
The
And I
ironic
don't-
thing is, season 2 drops tomorrow.
So all of this is, so we could binge that and do a follow up review.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, at least for the first season, like, I do not place any faith in that the writers had any idea what's going on in these tapes at all.
I don't either. I don't at all, because the whole premise of the show is what happens if the Nazis won. Let's show that world. And now that you have these tapes floating around of how the world, quote unquote, should be as we know it in the real world, like I said, now you're opening up some kind of weird interdimensional, crossover, which in the context of the show just doesn't work. It's like if I'm showing a history lesson on like the U.S. space race, and all of a sudden like you introduce Independence Day and like aliens come and attack the planet.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. You just can't come up with this interdimensional thing to explain stuff.
And that's the problem that I have with it, because when we see things, okay, so like they clearly show stuff that's like the Yalta Conference, okay, and D-Day, they show stuff like that, and to us, and that I guess if for a film, for a a TV series, like you can't have like the thing be a book. It's probably better if it's a film.
Yeah, so you can see it. Because like you said, for us, watching as a real person in the real world, watching this, and I see, like, the D-Day invasion in this world that never should have happened, you're like, oh, I know what that is. That's D-Day. You're recalling this thing in history that you know to be fact, but you also know it's not real in this world.
Yes.
But in the context of the show, like, you think about the main characters watching this tape, what they should think is just this is just some crazy tape somebody spliced together.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is how they see this and like, oh my God, I'm seeing evidence that the Nazis didn't win the war. I'm like, what?
Yeah, like, and that's the problem that it is the fundamental heart of the tapes, is because the Resistance put so much effort and like. The only way that the Resistance dying and losing so much over these tapes is worth it is, like, one, you have to know that, like, you're working towards some reset button on the war as a whole, and two, you have to think that the odds are so stacked against you that there's no way to overthrow this without this weird sci-fi method. and I don't think that the Resistance has shown either of those two things to be true.
No.
And the frustrating thing is that when the tapes are mentioned, or when they a main character asks, okay, so why are we doing this? What is the value of these tapes? The answer is always just like a one sentence, like, do what you're told, it doesn't matter, or it's well, they help save lives, and at some point some woman says, well, we rescued tape and like 10 POWs got freed, and it was like they never asked how, and it seems like they're going through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to move these tapes around, and the Germans and the Japanese are certain, like, they're mobilizing a huge amount of resources to, I mean, these tapes aren't even, like, if these tapes were being, like, shown in, like, movie theaters, and, like, they were being used as, like,
to the masses,
propaganda, right, to the masses or whatever, like, I could see them having an interest in the tapes, in the same way that, like, they would have like, if some guy was putting out leaflets that said "Down with the Nazis,"
right.
They would go after that guy in the same way. But they're not showing these to mass people, so there's no fear of civil insurrection here.
Yeah.
So either there's something that's valuable about the physical tape itself, or else this doesn't make any sense.
Imagine there is. But...
Yeah, right. And if these tapes are moving across the universe or something, well, why aren't other things moving across universes? Why?
Here's what I think they're setting it up to explain this. And it could be one of two possibilities. First of all, have you ever seen the show Life on Mars, the American version?
I've heard this. It's a guy wakes up in like 1970.
Yeah, so he's a cop in like the modern day, and then he gets hit by a car, and he wakes up in like the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert! At the end of the show, they're all on their way to Mars, and the whole thing was just a giant simulation.
Yes.
I think that's what they're kind of setting this show up to be.
Mm-hmm.
Either that it's all just a giant video game, or somebody along the way invented time travel, went to the past, changed something so that shot FDR. And
yes.
That sparked this series
Hitler
of events.
shoots FDR. Yeah.
That sparked this series of events that caused their reality to happen, but they still have these leftover tapes from before. So that's the way I see this going, and I that's the only conceivable explanation I can come up with. Either it's just a giant simulation and they're all a part of it, or it's some kind of time travel explanation from the future. Both of which I think is dumb in the context of what they're trying to do here, which is show Nazis winning World War II. But if it's something beyond that, if it's some weird, like I said, cross-dimensional thing where you have where you introduce like the multiverse. And there's just one universe out of like many. That just gets too far out there.
Yeah, like that's the problem with the, like, that's where I really feel I have seen crystal clear evidence the writers don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
Because the way, like, don't think of all, like, the millions of ways you could have written the main characters discovered Joe is a Nazi. Okay.
Right.
But, like, not all the 17 phone calls he makes mysteriously in the middle of the night that he never talks about, like, not that. But they find out he's a Nazi through this tape, this third tape, and this is the problem that I have with these tapes, is that, okay, so it looked like it was going to be a fairly straight, okay, there are two universes, there's our universe, and then there's, this secondary universe. And guess what? Audiences can deal with two universes. They can deal with two timelines. What audiences can't deal with is infinite timelines, all right? And it's the same problem with BioShock Infinite. Like, you can either you can say either there's a point of divergence here, or there's infinite timelines, so, you can kind of pick and choose whatever you want, like, but you can't have both. And there's a third tape they watch where it's I guess in the future of the Man in the High Castle timeline, where the Nazis have bombed San Francisco and their Nazis now occupy the formerly Japanese occupied San Francisco. So, like, now we're introducing tapes that can show the future of the Man in the High Castle, in the current timeline. And that's man, when you haven't set up how the rules work, and you can consistently refuse to set up how the rules work, and you introduce like something that's a curveball like that, I give you 0 out of 5. I don't believe that you know where you're going with this. So, yeah, I think that mostly they just kind of put the tapes on the back burner. But my hope
they eventually
is
have to explain where these things came from.
They do, but I mean, they don't. Like Lost, right?
I never
everything's
saw Lost.
in purgatory.
I refuse to see Lost because
I
so stupid.
I refuse to see Lost because, and I refuse to kind of really see X-Files, because that's where, like, you can keep people, chasing. You can keep a dog chasing a ball for a while, okay, and he's never gonna catch it, and some dogs will be happy with that, but guess what? I'm not a fucking dog. I like resolution to things that you bring up, and well, I mean, if these tapes were like no big deal and they didn't factor in the story too much, fine. But this is the tape that drives the plot of every, like, these tapes got Frank's sister and nephews killed. These tapes got Juliana's sister killed. These tapes get people killed all the time. These tapes are, made to be these high stakes things, and we know nothing about them, and they're very poorly explained. So, the issue I have there is that, like, I don't trust that they know what they're doing. What I had thought was going to happen was, because usually, if you have a series and you have like an A plot and a B plot, in this case the A plot is Hitler dies and the nukes fly, and the B plot is the tapes. Okay, so by the end, right, of your story, you probably want to have them join into one plot. So I was just thinking that, there was going to be some conventional means to try to stop, war, and it was going to fail, and everything was going to basically the people who were maybe had the most to lose, or had, a position in the society. Like, I'm thinking of, like, the Inspector and the Obergruppenführer, these people who really do believe in this society will realize that, I guess if it's all going to get nuked anyway, what's the point? We've clearly gone down the wrong path. So let's hit the reset button, and then bam, everybody winds up in the real world. And
well, that doesn't explain where the tapes came from, though.
I mean, I think that you can work something out where, like, Hitler invents time travel and then goes back. Yeah, I mean, whatever, like
fixes his own death.
Yeah. Or you could just introduce some, hi, I'm Werner von Heisenberg. I discovered this amazing, special device. Okay, like, I never like, as much as I hated, the Bioshock Infinite stuff, I never really disliked the Lutesses, because they're kind of there for a reason. They're there to give you the fantastic whatever machine.
Yeah.
That drives the plot, and as long as you kind of quarantine that and isolate that, it's and as far as the story goes, I think it's fine. But like I said, I don't give the writers credit enough to think that they know what they're doing, especially after the really kind of waffling performance by all three main actors.
Yeah. I do think I agree. I don't think the writers had any idea where they were going with this. But I want to go back to what you just said there, because I think that's a very interesting way to think about it, is that in reality, the Nazis did win. Let's say the Nazis did win, and then you fast forward 20, 30 years and realize, oh my God, this is such an awful world, and it ends in nuclear, nuclear winter for everybody, because everybody's going to kill each other once Hitler dies. We need to fix this. So we go back in time and correct World War II to end up being the Allies win, therefore preventing the culmination of our world from destroying itself. And I think that's a very interesting aspect. However, I don't think it works in the context of this show, because, like I said, where does the tapes come from? What would be the point of introducing the tapes? Unless that's to show this other world that it could be. At the end of the day, I still think they're going to explain this via time travel. I don't see any other way around it.
Yeah, I don't see any way around it too. And I was just thinking, what would make... I mean, what you could do to really neatly wrap this up, and man, the High Castle writers, if you're listening, I'm willing to give script treatments for anything that you anything you want to throw my way. But you can neatly wrap this up, I think, by putting the whatever device, let's just say there's some risk. Okay, let's say at the end of the Second World War, the Nazis have invented this time travel device, okay, and they're about to lose, and Hitler's, in his eagle's nest, okay, and, someone comes up to him and is like, we have the device ready, and, they figure out some way to change the timeline. But then, you could have a scene where, like they go back and, they convince Hitler somehow. It's like, no, and well, that's why Hitler commits suicide, right? You know, he had no intention. He has no intention of committing suicide when he walks in there, you know, and he's shown, you know, he does this thing, and the world changes, and they realize that, you know, like
the tapes of this reality of the.
They should, yeah, they should. It would be a nice bookend thing, you know, if you had like Hitler being shown, the Hitler from our reality being shown
the world
tapes
he's
from the Man in the High
creating,
Castle universe, where he's, you know, and that's the thing that hasn't really been talked about, I think, is that Hitler's out of power, and at this point in the story, and Hitler has been like sidelined and marginalized, and I think, you know, like you can make us say that he's really bitter and resentful, and everything's about to be blown up anyway, you know. I think maybe you could make that work, but ultimately, I think that we have major problems here that just weren't addressed with the tapes. I hope they're going to get addressed in season 2, but I doubt it, because it's something that, and this is why I wanted to, you know, keep this towards the end, because I have a problem with this, but a lot of people don't. You know, Lost was incredibly successful.
Yeah.
Battlestar Galactica was incredibly successful.
But, you know, I mean, I have a problem with this too, but I guess, I mean, thinking about it, I could see the masses would not have a problem with this.
Yeah, and
But that's just because we're smarter than them.
Just we're Ubermensch. that's what we are, you know. I mean, I don't understand why people don't hold, you know, writers to the standard, and I feel like everybody gets really, you know, mad and disappointed at endings to things, and I go, no, like, you went along with this middle that didn't make any sense, and like you expected that just to be wrapped up in a nice bow. No, it never, like,
no,
the foundations.
9 times out of 10, it never does.
Yeah, like the foundations were screwed up. Okay, you know, the shingles are not gonna go on. Whatever. I don't know anything about houses, so that's pretty obvious right there. But you know, you have to have like a coherent and sensible story in the mid game in order to have a good, decent ending. And I don't see that. I'll be pleasantly surprised tomorrow. You know, maybe. But
yeah, well, I think since we're so close to this and season 2 coming out tomorrow, I think we should binge watch it and do another one of these to our reactions.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think that's a great idea.
Stay tuned for part 2, I guess.
Stay tuned for part 2.
This has been a presentation of Honey Sound Broadcasting, an affiliate of the Bilko Media Network.